Wow, this girl is not. The world was rocked by Princess Diana's passing. However, no one knew the full extent of her brother's suffering. One father never wanted to see William and Harry follow the instructions to walk behind their mother's coffin on September 6, 1997. Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, was against it from the beginning. Why did Spencer find the funeral plans so upsetting? And why, after all these years, is he only now speaking out? Come along as we reveal the heartache and unseen struggles that led to Diana's funeral. The funeral of Lady Diana. The world watched Princess Diana's funeral on September 6, 1997. Her funeral was televised on all continents. London's streets were crowded with millions. Billions more watched television from the comfort of their homes. There was a weight to the day that no other day had. People wept openly, their faces displaying grief, their hands gripping flowers, and their eyes streaming with tears. The air looked thick with loss, and the city turned into a sea of despair. A moment of universal anguish was being witnessed by the entire world. However, two lads who were carrying more than anyone could have imagined were at the center of it all. Behind their mother's coffin, Prince William, 15, and Prince Harry, 12, strolled. Their eyes were downcast and their faces were pallid. Every step was purposeful, and the cameras recorded every motion. They were calm, courageous, and dignified in the eyes of the world. Beneath that serene exterior, however, they bore a weight well beyond their years. You will be shocked by the emotional toll of what happened that day. Continue to observe every step of the lengthy journey from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey, which no one knew about, pressed down on the boys. The burden of loss mixed with obligation and anticipation. That one moment changed their childhoods forever. For decades to come, Harry would be plagued by the scene, a reminder of the grief and duty he was forced to bear. Diana's younger brother, Charles Spencer, had recognized the error of this procession from the start. He had known her all his life. He had a deeper understanding of her than the other members of the royal family. He was aware of her tears, her laughter, and the silent fragility that was frequently concealed by a grin. He was against William and Harry, walking behind their mother's coffin as soon as he found out. To expose two children to the world in the midst of their suffering was unthinkable to him. It defied his natural inclination to keep them safe. He felt anxiety at the idea of strangers analyzing every emotion and cameras, focusing on every facial expression. The lads should be saved, Spencer urged. He saw it as deeply unnatural, needless, and cruel. He opposed it wherever he could, emphasizing that mourning was a personal experience rather than a public display. But the palace held its ground. They asserted that the youngsters had selected the parade themselves and insisted that it go. For Spencer, that assertion was a game changer. He would take a back seat if it were really their decision. He refused to get in the way of what the kids wanted. However, the truth was different. Harry and William had no other option. They received instructions. Harry, who was 12, was unable to say no. They were forced to make the choice. Spencer moved aside, thinking he was doing what they wanted. He discovered later that he had been duped. When he realized the truth, his relief in believing the boys had agency gave way to sorrow. There was nothing he could do to halt what he had fought with all his strength. That wasn't the worst, though. Stay put. Alongside his nephews, Spencer walked in the procession. Every step was captured by cameras, which also captured the boys' downcast eyes and pale features. William and Harry never let a tear fall in public, as they proceeded with silent determination. While the rest of the world praised their poise, Spencer saw pain. Every stride was a silent effort, he realized. There was no dignity about the walk. The performance was forced. Harry's memory was marked by every moment, leaving scars that would influence how he saw the organization he was born into. Harry was profoundly affected. Years later, he said the incident felt unreal, like it was occurring to someone else. Although the pain was present, it was made worse by the realization that he had no control over the circumstance. Although William exuded a quiet strength, both boys were carrying a lot of weight. Spencer felt both the loss of his sister and the anguish of seeing her kids suffer from what he saw as unfair treatment. His spirit was broken by the helplessness he felt after losing the fight to shield them from the public spectacle. The emotional suffering persisted even after the funeral procession was over. The world had witnessed a respectful demonstration of poise, but beneath this was unfiltered, unadulterated pain. He realized after the incident that even when it came to the welfare of children, the system would take precedence over individual judgment. Although Princess Diana's funeral was a public event, those closest to her endured profound suffering. According to Spencer, the day was unfair. Understanding the full effects of Diana's passing and the difficulties her sons would face was just getting started. Beyond the streets of London, the story would delve into the personal conflicts, decisions, and difficulties that shaped William and Harry in ways that the outside world would never completely witness. The narrative is just beginning, so stay tuned. The public confrontation and eulogy of Charles Spencer. Charles Spencer stood at the platform in front of a room full of dignitaries, celebrities, and leaders inside Westminster Abbey. But he was the center of attention. Spencer didn't start off with compliments or kind remarks. He addressed the millions of people watching from all over the world, as well as the people in the Abbey, with conviction and clarity. Every syllable conveyed his sorrow, the breadth of his comprehension, and the annoyance of someone who had personally experienced the injustice. Diana was characterized by Spencer in vivid, memorable ways. According to his portrayal, she was the most persecuted individual of the modern era, a woman who was ceaselessly chased by forces who were supposed to protect her. Around her, the reporters, the cameras, and the demands of monarchy had created a never-ending storm. He emphasized Diana's life, which was molded by both public attention and personal vulnerability, and how she had been subjected to constant surveillance and intrusion. He did not embellish or exaggerate in his speech. He made it apparent that the systems and organizations that had failed to protect her were to blame for her suffering, which was not an accident. The eulogy was both an homage and a confrontation. Spencer was not afraid to hold the media and organizations accountable for their role in Diana's hardships. He brought attention to the shortcomings of those who were supposed to look after her, demonstrating how she had been left vulnerable and unguarded. The statements were sharp and direct, piercing the solemn silence that frequently envelops royal funerals. Each sentence conveyed a sense of responsibility. Spencer was urging everyone to realize the true nature of the situation and the part played by those who could have taken action, but decided against it. Spencer promised to do more than speak for his sister. He promised that William and Harry will be protected by Diana's relatives. Additionally, he said that her biological family would protect her kids, and that they wouldn't have to deal with the same stressors and lack of assistance that Diana experienced. His public pledge to protect the boys from the severe pressures of royal life was clear-cut and unwavering. It was a direct challenge to those in positions of power, who had let her down, and a message to the world, a guarantee that her family's commitment will carry on her heritage. And it wasn't all. The royal family's power was openly challenged in the speech. Spencer didn't use diplomatic language when he spoke. He made it apparent that Diana's suffering had gone unnoticed by those in positions of authority, and that she had not been completely embraced by the organization she had married into. One could feel the tension in the Abbey. The crowd reacted differently, but members of the royal household maintained their composure and maintained neutral expressions. Unusually for such a sad occasion, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. There was a clear knowledge of the injustice that had occurred, and the support was evident. Spencer later acknowledged that he was powerless to deprive William and Harry of their royal status. There were restrictions on the pledge to keep them safe. Even with his dedication, the boys were already a part of a reality that no amount of words, no matter how sincere, could alter. The institutions of the monarchy were rigid, and he could not fully protect them. He was aware that the commitment was not a concrete guarantee, but rather a proclamation of purpose, with some symbolic meaning. However, the statement reaffirmed the notion that the lads were not alone, and that someone outside the castle was aware of their precarious situation. Spencer's remarks also demonstrated Diana's lack of genuine royal acceptance. He depicted a woman whose popularity and influence had never resulted in her being truly accepted by the family she had married into. Diana's gifts, kindness, and compassion had blossomed in public. She was, nevertheless, isolated and under strain in the royal household. Spencer made it apparent that her genius was her own, independent of her position or kinship. Spencer wasn't finished, though, and you will cry when you read the remaining portion of his statement. He reminded the audience that Diana's fragility and grief went unnoticed by the royal family. Only a sibling could have the amount of insight Spencer used to express her hardships. He remembered her cries for assistance, her desperation, and the isolation she experienced in the midst of luxury. The broader story of failure included the monarchy's silence toward her needs. Spencer made certain that the world would hear what had been disregarded by expressing this in a public way. His remarks were a clear recognition of her humanity, and a denial that the institution's callousness could take away her suffering. The speech laid the groundwork for continued examination of Diana's treatment by the royal family, and, consequently, how it would safeguard her offspring. It was impossible to overlook the discrepancies between private reality and public impression when Spencer spoke. Although the funeral was a formal farewell, his remarks encouraged responsibility and introspection outside of the monastery. Those who watched realized that Diana's treatment affected the boys, the institution, and the public monarchy connection. Discussions of accountability, openness, and the well-being of individuals born into royal life were all impacted by the eulogy. Spencer's eulogy was not only a tribute, it was a confrontation with the structures that had let his sister down, a statement of intent, and an assertion of truth. Although the ritual was reverently observed, his words pierced the formality with unadulterated passion and uncompromising candor. The crowd acknowledged the bravery required to speak so bluntly, both within and outside the abbey. He didn't sugarcoat Diana's treatment or the facts of her life. By doing this, he solidified the eulogy as one of the most significant and unforgettable in recent memory. It was obvious what this meant for William and Harry. Their family would battle to keep them safe, even though the world would see them. Spencer's words reverberated long after the funeral day was over. When the monarchy was openly contested, it signaled a shift in public consciousness. His words lingered in the hearts of the throng outside London's streets. The cheers inside the abbey indicate a unique convergence of the spoken truth and public opinion. Spencer's speech provided clarity to fury, shape and form to sadness, and a guarantee that Diana's family would not die like her. However, the burial was not the start of Spencer's battle against the royal family. It began as soon as his sister passed away. In what way then were Spencer provoked by the British royals? To find out, keep watching. Diana's death and the royal response. Let's go back to the beginning. Princess Diana was running from the paparazzi, who had been following her for years when she was seen in a black Mercedes in a Paris tunnel on August 31, 1997. Regretfully, there was a terrible crash. The car was crumpled like paper by the force of the impact. Diana was seriously hurt but survived the initial collision. From whispers to shattering headlines, the story spread quickly. It was verified in a matter of hours. The response to the announcement of Diana's passing was swift. The Princess of Wales, Diana, has indeed been murdered. The Princess of Wales, Diana, had passed away. Her brother, Charles Spencer, was miles away in South Africa and was unaware of what had just transpired, while the rest of the world was in shock. When the first call arrived, Spencer was asleep. The calm but firm voice on the other end said that Diana had suffered severe injuries in a vehicle accident. As he took in the words, his heart pounded. His thoughts instantly turned to the photographers pursuing Diana that evening, as he was aware of the ongoing strain she was under from press photographers. As he awaited additional information, his concern gave way to rage. An hour passed in the span of minutes. After a second, colder call, it was confirmed that she had passed away. The information was stated in an uncomfortably toned voice. In part, Spencer knew right away who was to blame. Her death was partly caused by the paparazzi, who had harassed her for years. Waves of anguish swept through the public outside Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace. People gathered haphazardly, holding personal notes, photos, and flowers. With their faces buried in their hands, men, women, and children wept freely. The tone was thick and unpolished. In honor of the woman regarded as the people's princess, thousands of people lined the streets and left mounds of tributes. Shock, incredulity, and sadness filled the air. The response was universal. Images of mourning crowds, roadways blocked by flowers, and tearful faces were all over the news stations. The world seemed to have stopped to take in the magnitude of the loss. However, there was just when the problems began. We're going to unveil something fascinating, so hold on tight. The royal family's reaction to Diana's passing was chilly. There was silence for hours, then days. There was no speech by the Queen, no official declaration, and no flags being down at Buckingham Palace. The family was thought to be in shock, but as the silence drew on, it seemed as though apathy was taking hold. The noise of questions outside the palace walls increased. Why did the monarchy fail to recognize the nation's sorrow? Charles and the boys were nowhere to be seen. Normally polite newspapers started running critical headlines. The people of Britain felt alone in their grief. They had felt a connection and affection for Diana. However, the organization that encircled her appeared inattentive, aloof, and frozen. William and Harry were in Balmoral in the meantime. As the family dealt with the news, they were shielded from public view. Their mother's death had to be explained to them by their father, Prince Charles. The 12-year-old Harry found the discussion pointless. He kept asking the same question in an attempt to comprehend, and to ascertain that she would not come back. They hadn't spoken to her since the previous day, a brief informal discussion that was now intolerable. Before being put in a controlled setting, neither boy had time to adequately say farewell or fully comprehend the situation. There was a lot of confusion and stillness in the beginning. Nobody talked about Diana in public inside the palace. The boys were surrounded by family, yet they did not receive the emotional support they required. While the outside world was in tears, the attitude within Balmoral was calm and collected. Later on, Harry acknowledged that he felt alone. He experienced the mourning in seclusion, watching it unfold on television. It was difficult and unsettling to feel disconnected. Children were unable to express their grief because of the formal attitude taken by the facility. Spencer, of course, saw this, experiencing the hurt and anguish of the family's separation. The royal family was under increasing public pressure. In order to observe recognition of the loss that impacted millions, people demanded that their sorrow be represented. The Queen finally spoke to the country on September 5. Diana was hailed by her as a remarkable human being. Honor Diana myself. In particular, her love to her two boys, and her role as a loving mother to William and Harry, made her a remarkable and unique human person. Days after the people had already risen in grief and rage, the address was delivered. By that time, animosity had grown. Many saw the delay as evidence that the monarchy had failed to recognize the importance of empathy. Although the Queen's remarks were sincere, the harm caused by the silence was still present. The public observed the contrast between the family's aloof, chilly reaction and Diana's friendliness and warmth. Spencer's fears were validated by the royal family's lack of response and quiet. Protocol was not the only reason for the disengagement. It was disengaged and cold. But that's not all. The very organization that ought to have offered consolation and direction had not acted quickly enough. Millions of people publicly grieved, but the family remained distant, resulting in a clear separation between private authority and public sorrow. Seeing the youngsters impacted by this delay only made Spencer more irate. He saw that William and Harry were left to deal with their loneliness and sadness as a result of the lack of transparency, which shaped their loss experience in ways that would persist for years. Harry's constant inquiries regarding their mother's whereabouts reveal a child's battle with an unfathomable reality. He had limited ability to process or step in at the age of 12. All adult explanations were screened, using procedures that prioritized calmness over ease. William, who was older but just as impacted, kept his own suffering to himself. Spencer observed this interaction with annoyance, realizing that the boys were going through a form of sorrow that was influenced by the strict rules of royal life, rather than by love or support. This early stage carried a heavy emotional cost that affected their future perceptions of the organization and their role within it. The populace was still congregating outside the royal homes in the meantime. There was no doubt about the nation's commitment to Diana as the volume and intensity of tributes increased. People wanted the monarchy to show compassion, be seen, and be acknowledged. There was a sharp contrast between royal quiet and public grieving. The palace came under fire from newspapers for appearing unconcerned, and the postponement of addressing the country left a long-lasting impression of disconnection. Spencer noticed this and realized that the organization had handled the situation poorly in terms of compassion and communication. In addition to his sister's passing, the boy's perplexity and loneliness served as fire for his resentment of the royal family. The nation had already made up its mind by the time the Queen spoke. There had been a sense of isolation and coldness brought forth by the monarchy's silence. Spencer was aware that the lads and the general public would suffer as a result of the delay. Harry, in particular, would be affected for decades by the effects of those early hours and days. It influenced his future perspectives on authority, safety, and the duties of those tasked with protecting loved ones. Spencer recognized the need of advocacy and attentiveness. The confusion of the first few hours and the royal family's reaction exposed the conflict between institutional behavior and public expectations. As it became clear that the boys needed protection and direction that the royal family had not given them in those crucial early moments, Spencer saw it through the eyes of someone who had lost a brother-in-law and a sister, and who was aware of her children's vulnerability. His viewpoint stemmed from his deep understanding of Diana's personality and the realities of life in the royal family. For William and Harry, the experiences of those days shaped their conceptions of responsibility, vulnerability, and emotional survival. Seeing the gap between the boys' private sadness and the public mourning outside the palace gates heightened Spencer's rage and protective tendencies. As the country wept and the media condemned, the boys stayed safe in Balmoral and gradually came to terms with the truth. While the institution kept control over exposure and information, the outside world kept demanding answers. Spencer's feeling of unfairness only intensified. The original tragedy was exacerbated by the delay in speaking to the boys in the public, creating a mix of helplessness, indignation, and grief. The difficulties and conflicts that would follow would be framed by the events of those early days. Wait until you hear Harry's thoughts on Diana's passing and funeral, if you believe it was the worst. Harry claims that he is still affected by the trauma he experienced while walking behind his mother's coffin. He was reminded of that September day in 1997 each time he saw cameras flashing. He was burdened by grief, anticipation, and obligation. As he got older, he understood that the pressures he was under extended beyond that particular instance. They belonged to the very royal system. Harry witnessed the institution's demands for poise, allegiance, and prominence at the price of individual welfare. He saw the same patterns recurring after he married Meghan. She was under continual scrutiny from the press, and the palace's response frequently came out as aloof or unresponsive. Harry saw the similarities between his mother's story and Meghan's hardships. It seemed like history was being repeated, with the same systems that had held Diana back, now endangering his own family's well-being. At first he felt helpless to alter the system, or completely defend his loved ones. Harry, however, decided to take action. Unlike Diana, without agency, he refused to go through the same cycle of mental injury and exposure. He and Meghan took the historic choice to leave their royal responsibilities and relocate to the US in 2020. They severed their formal connections with the monarchy, abandoning the titles, responsibilities, and prominence that had characterized their existence. The action was not an act of defiance per se. It came down to survival. Harry was resolved to shield his family from the same stresses that had characterized his early years and to stop history from happening again. In many respects, Harry was carrying on Diana's legacy. She had fought against the institution's expectations of her, freely discussed her difficulties, and sought independence. Harry continued that tradition by using his own free will to design a life free from the strictures of the monarchy, where he and his family could determine their own happiness, safety, and priorities. Harry's choice was understood by Charles Spencer. He had criticized the system that had let his sister down for decades, fought for her safety and dignity, and lamented her children's lack of protection. He was quite quiet about his support, but it was obvious that he understood Harry's decision. Both men behaved in ways that respected Diana's memory and ideals, because they had seen the effects of a system that put appearance before care. The long-term effects of royal customs and public expectations on children, raised in the spotlight, are demonstrated by the tale of Diana, William, and Harry. Harry's eventual decision to leave, and Spencer's struggle to keep the boys safe, highlight the value of family support, agency, and activism. Their deeds demonstrate that preserving Diana's legacy necessitates not just paying tribute to her memory, but also opposing systems that do not adequately protect the weakest members of society. Diana's legacy continues to influence how the royal family, the general public, and the institution's offspring view loss, responsibility, and individual choice through Harry's disobedience and Spencer's support. It acts as a reminder that autonomy, care, and protection are equally as vital as custom, ritual, and expectation. The narrative explores learning, action, and the bravery to put human welfare ahead of protocol in addition to loss. We appreciate you remaining with us. What aspect of the narrative disturbs you the most? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you liked the video. Additionally, you will love the following video if you click on it.